guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled, HOA forced me to tear down my white picket fence and didn't allow me to protect my autistic son. TLDR. I built a white picket fence in my front yard to protect my autistic son from running out into the street. After a grace period of not hearing back from the HOA, I am allowed to build it. They start sending me fines and threatening to have my house foreclosed and to sue me, and I have to tear it down. In court, when the judge finds out my son is autistic, and the fence is for his protection, I destroy them. They end up having to pay for a new fence and narrowly avoided getting charged with harassment. My local HOA seems to have a big thing with the neighborhood looking as uniform as possible. I can understand that to a degree, but also, they need to realize that sometimes special circumstances need to take more importance than that. Now my son is 5 years old and has autism. So, for him things aren't exactly as easy to explain to him as it would be explaining to other kids in the neighborhood. One thing that he had been doing constantly was getting out of the house and running right into the street. He couldn't understand the concept of cars hitting him and needing to be careful and staying on the lawn. One time he managed to get out of the front door when I was bringing something in from the car, and I saw him in his PJs running into the middle of the street. I had to drop everything to grab him and saw a car was going down the street at that moment. I knew that I needed to protect my son in addition to trying to work on teaching him about safety. And while of course locking the front door would always be the first line of defense, it worried me to think that it was still possible for him to just get out of that door and then be able to get right into the street. Because of that problem, I wanted to install a gate and fence around the front of my property so that even if he got out of the front door, he would be stopped by the fence. Or of course, as a kid he would want to play outside, and this way he could, without me needing to be ready every 2 seconds to sprint and stop him from running in the street. Now that I got that out of the way, let me go back to talk about what this has to do with the HOA. Since nobody else has a fence, I needed to fill out an application and wait to get permission from them to build the fence. I make sure to highlight the fact that I don't want it for the looks of it, I want it to protect my autistic son. I heard nothing back, and the rules state that if I didn't get anything telling me that I couldn't within 30 days, it was just as good as getting told yes. Still, I was cautious and waited 60 days before I finally decided that they must not have cared and had the fence built in my yard. Now I just want to take a moment to say that I still wanted my property to look good, and the fence that I picked out wasn't crazy or anything. It was a white picket fence that matched the rest of my house. This way it looked like it belonged there, and I had a professional install it, so everything looked really good. It wasn't long before I kept getting messages from the HOA that my fence wasn't allowed and giving me fines. I was actually a little bit worried because I know from other stories that the HOA can be brutal and didn't want anything bad to happen about them. I wanted to be proactive, and I sent back a letter explaining about the 30-day period of not hearing anything back and telling them again about my son. I got no response from them except for more fines and even a note saying that if I didn't remove my fence, I was going to have my house foreclosed. While I knew they probably didn't have that power, I was terrified and didn't know what to do. The fines kept coming in, and I was finally given a letter saying that I was going to be taken to court by them for violating the rules. I ended up having to take the fence down while they took me to court, and I was stuck trying to defend myself. Keep in mind, this entire time I was trying to contact any member of the HOA and getting fully ignored by them. I didn't feel comfortable going to one of their homes or anything and wanted it to be done professionally. I don't know if they thought ignoring me was going to make their case stronger, or if they lost my application and thought I never filed one. I really wanted to get this settled out of court, but it didn't seem like that was going to happen, so I was forced to get a lawyer and go up against them and their HOA lawyer. At this point, as much as I wanted to get the green light to reinstall my fence, I had bigger problems to worry about. The fines had added up to over $1,000 at this point, which was money I didn't have. Plus, if they could get me kicked out of my house, then me and my son would have nowhere to go. Even just to go to court, I had to drive an hour away to drop my son off at my mother's house. When it was going on, I'm not going to lie, I didn't fully know what was going on. I'm not great at understanding legal talk, and that is the main reason that I got a lawyer. They were showing the papers that I signed and agreed to when I moved into the HOA and highlighting the parts that involved my fence. Then they showed pictures of my fence and how the fines they sent were perfectly acceptable in these guidelines. I was scared, and then the judge asked me to explain why I had built the fence in the first place without getting the approval from the HOA. I basically told him the whole story, and when the fact my son was autistic dropped, it was as if everything changed. I guess they didn't bother to tell their lawyer that detail, but mine was using it to his full advantage. He said that because my son had a disability, his needs were protected by the HOA laws, and that overrode anything that I signed with an HOA for. Then he said that their repeated letters without giving me any chance for communication was considered harassment, and that I was persuaded with fear to take down the fence after all of that. It was obvious their judge had no way to counter the fact that the fence was to stop my son from running out into the street and putting himself and others in danger. We won at the end of the day, and the fines were basically thrown away. There was still one issue though that needed to be resolved, and that was the fact they had made me take down the fence. A fence that wasn't exactly cheap to have a professional put up in the first place. The lawyers both agreed that if I didn't pursue any of the individuals for harassment, then they would use funds from HOA fees and use it to rebuild my fence. Honestly, that was perfectly fine by me, and before I knew it, my son was able to run around in the front yard again without being in danger. I honestly don't know why they were so against the fence, because it wasn't like it stuck out like a sore thumb or anything. The HOA is pretty quiet in our neighborhood overall, and I really hope that is the last encounter I am going to have with them. The next story is titled, Karen, the building manager, probably regrets her wording. I live in a housing cooperative. I have no idea if there is something equivalent in other countries, but I live in Norway. It's essentially where you own your own apartment, but the cooperative owns the buildings and the land. If you're going to make changes to the building, you'll have to apply for a permit. Otherwise, it's generally do as you please, as long as you don't bother your neighbors. Anyways, I put up a small greenhouse on my private patio. As many others had done, but not this exact type. This was an aluminum construction, not a frame with a loose plastic cover kind. The building manager, who is best described as a triple Karen, threw a fit. She actually watched me spending 3 days assembling the greenhouse, then the next day she called me and threw a fit. Not because I put up a greenhouse, but because I had used screws to fasten it to the patio for stability. Apparently, I was not allowed to use screws on the floorboards, as this was considered changes to the building in her mind. And I had destroyed the floorboards. Never mind, the whole patio was built with, wait for it, screws though the floorboards. Screws in the wall were okay, she told me, in response to me asking about why she'd put up shelves on her patio herself. But not the floorboards. Apparently, the difference was monumental, and everyone should just know this, intuitively. Nowhere, literally nowhere, does it say fastening things to the floorboards or putting screws in the floorboards is not allowed. Not in the house rules, my contract, or in the National Housing Cooperatives law. But she was furious I had done this. I took a deep breath, and as I am quite creative, I immediately thought of a workaround. I'll just put it on wheels, then. I made a big number of saying that fastening was essential, because otherwise the greenhouse would not be stable enough to withstand wind. She said she understood this, but I had now ruined the co-op's property. And this was a really serious matter. She told me to send an application for a permit, to see if she could find a way to get approval from the board. But she could not guarantee I could keep it, she said, with the fakest of sympathies. So, I sent the application, with photos, saying what I had done, and that I didn't think I had to apply to do it, as I never considered putting in a prefabricated greenhouse would be seen as changes to the building. My application was rejected, as I anticipated. But she worded the rejection exactly as I hoped she would. I was not allowed to put in a fastened greenhouse, and she probably thought she'd been clever when she included that I was not allowed to put the greenhouse on my front lawn neither. I had worked the "it needs to be fastened to be stable" angle hard, because I hoped she, as the Karen she is, would fall for that reverse psychology. So, I proceeded to put the greenhouse on wheels. I made a frame from 2 by 4 feet and put 8 small furniture wheels under the frame. I then lifted and screwed the greenhouse onto the frame. I put some boards on the sides, just above the ground, to stop the draft. Boom! Mobile greenhouse. I can slide it all over the patio. I put some hooks in the walls and used transport straps to secure the whole thing to the wall for stability. The walls were okay to put screws in, remember? So, in effect, my greenhouse is now in the exact same location, 4 inches taller, and with ugly, blue ribbons tying it to the wall. And the patio now has 22 open screw holes, ready to be filled with rainwater in the fall. But oh well, as she's repeatedly told me, it's not my patio. Then I sent an orientation email to the building manager with photos and videos of the sliding greenhouse, with the rest of the board members on copy, where I explained in detail what I had done, and how every step was in compliance with the rejection email I had received, which I of course included. I said the greenhouse was now to be considered a piece of mobile patio furniture, just like my sofa and chairs were. And that I now considered this subject to be a closed matter. I have not heard a single word from any of them. It's been over a week. I think I got her. I can't imagine she'll find a loophole that lets her legally dictate what patio furniture is allowed and not in the co-op, since the patios are stated to be for every apartment owner's private usage. So, when Christmas comes, I'm planning to decorate the greenhouse with lights. Make it pretty. Because every time Karen steps out of her front door, she has to face my patio where she is looking straight at my greenhouse. The least I can do is make it pretty for her, right? Some background. I'm a 39 female. I've lived here for 10 years without a single complaint. Karen is the new building manager. Being the Karen she is, which means highly narcissistic female, she's using my greenhouse as a way to establish her newfound authority. Make an example. I didn't get her permission, so the greenhouse got to go. It's not about the holes. It was just the only argument she could use to get me to take it down, especially since I had argued hard that it needed to be fastened for stability. And I am going to take care of the holes. I'll either fix the holes or change the few damaged floorboards, and I told her this on the phone. The damage is no big deal either way. The greenhouse is my therapy. I suffer from PTSD. So, keeping my therapy is kind of a big deal to me. Not trying to get sympathy, just saying why I decided to fight her on this. Update, October 1st. I don't know if Karen learned about her Reddit infamy and felt stupid, but today I got a new email from her. She's now letting me keep the greenhouse, because it is now a mobile unit. No mention of the holes in the floor. But she was careful to remind me that any loose object that damages the co-op's property if the wind gets a hold of it, is my financial responsibility. Well, I'm really not too worried about that. The straps are designed to hold 4 tons each, and I've got 3 of them. Plus, there's this amazing little thing called insurance. Now that I've got in writing that my greenhouse is approved by the board, I'm pretty sure I'm covered on the off chance the 6 ounces plastic windows manage to break free from frames and straps and wreak havoc on the neighborhood. The next story is titled, "You don't like the sight of my trash bins in front of my house?" Okay, sure. Just happened, so I don't know what's going to happen after this, but hope it's worth the read for you. We just recently bought a house and moved in. I'm talking less than 2 months since we signed the papers. A couple days ago, we got a letter in the mail, no return address. The gist of the letter was just a piece of paper stating what we can't do with our house: no building non-permanent buildings, no trailers or RVs to be parked on the roadway, etc. Highlighted on the paper was a line stating, all trash must be put in metal or plastic bins and must be put in the garage or behind the fence. I was worried and honestly a bit confused. We have no HOA, Homeowners Association for those who don't know. So I was wondering why we were receiving this letter when there shouldn't really be anyone enforcing it or fining us. It honestly didn't make any sense, so I decided to text my next-door neighbor to see what they made of it. Long story short, they explained that the neighbor across the street from us is a huge stickler for the rules and is probably the one who printed out that paper, highlighted the section, and sent it to us without the return address so that we wouldn't know who it was. There are a few houses on our street that have their bins outside their house, so it's pretty obvious the person who sent us the letter just doesn't like looking at it through their front window. Cue malicious compliance. We have a home gym in our garage and didn't want to put it inside because of the space but decided to move things around just for this compliance. SO and I agreed that the best way to comply is to push the bins in 4 feet so that it's in the garage. However, we're going to leave the garage door open all day every day we're home so that they still have to look at it. Can't say much now, can they? The last story is titled, "Clearly this is the perfect time to get to know the new neighbors." About 2 years after my family moved to a smallish university town in a southwestern state of the US, the acreage around our house was sold to developers. The building noise was awful a lot of the time. But we met some great people, the workmen on the various phases, not the real estate developers. Once the first part of the development was finished enough to have neighbors living in them, the house sort of next to slash behind our house sold. The new owners were veterinarians. He taught at the university and she had just opened up a practice near our house. They had dogs, who apparently were not allowed into the house after dark. One of the poor dogs was an elderly spaniel who was blind, and she would get lost out in the yard. My parents' bedroom is closest to these neighbors' house. The city has an ordinance about barking dogs, letting your dogs bark all night, etc. And these neighbors also had a brand new HOA that specifically had fines starting at the how many times the dog barked in an hour. Who was assigned to count the barks, I never did find out. But these vets let their dogs bark for hours. We asked them nicely to make it stop. Other neighbors would go and ask them to make the dogs stop barking, but they just wouldn't. The HOA got onto them. Didn't seem to change anything. Even having the cops stop by and give them a ticket for letting the dogs bark for hours every night didn't stop them. Mrs. Veterinarian told a cop and some neighbors gathered around that her dogs were angels and were not the ones barking. She would be kept up all night if her dogs were out in the yard barking all night. Clearly it must be someone else's dogs and her poor babies were being picked on. So, a few nights later my mom asked me to make a big batch of muffins. She set up the coffee maker and made up a tray that had everything needed to go have coffee and muffins with the new neighbors. That night when the dogs started barking, Mom got up to work on some grating. About 2 a.m., Mom started the coffee and poured it into a thermal carafe. She made sure to make the tray look very pretty. Then she carried that tray all the way around to the veterinarian neighbor's house. She knocked on the door and rang the bell until they answered. Then just as sweet as pie she said it seemed like the perfect time to really get to know them since clearly no one in either their house or ours could sleep through their dogs barking all night. After that, their dogs didn't bother us at night. They made sure of it. In the long run, they turned into very nice neighbors, thankfully. Thanks for listening.